My name is Dr. Richard Watkins, and this just in, I love to argue. I love to debate, but does it serve any purpose? Is it even good at convincing someone of anything? I also like movies, and there is perhaps an interesting connection between debate, argument, movies, and philosophy. We're going to explore all of that on today's episode of the Richard Watkins Podcast. Listen, I am glad that you are with us. How we start off all the time. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Whenever you might be joining us, I am happy that you are with us. Today, we're going to explore some great topics. And remember, the Richard Watkins Podcast is an educational show committed to lifelong learning. We work to connect you with scientists, educators, community leaders through meaningful conversations. And I hope this is one of those conversations. The Richard Watkins Podcast is a proud production of the Science Policy Action Network, or SPAN. SPAN is here to connect you with innovation and knowledge, whether you are a public official, a business owner, or community organizer, and you want to explore the future. SPAN is your partner. Visit SPAN at span-inc.org. That's span-inc.org. Now, without further ado, let's just go ahead and get into today's topic. We are here with another amazing solo episode of the Richard Watkins podcast. I really love these episodes because, quite frankly, I like to talk. Yeah, I like to talk. That's why I created a podcast. I like to give speeches. I love giving speeches. I have a few speeches coming up. But I also love the exercise of debate and argument. I absolutely love it. Whether it's about sports, whether it's about culture, politics, pop culture, I mean, you name it. I want to debate it. I want to argue. It's fun, but I oftentimes wonder, you know, am I even good at it? I mean, I guess I like it not necessarily for the purpose of convincing someone of anything. I love debate and argument just for the intellectual exercise that it presents. I mean, I like to explore my own ideas, my own thoughts, but I also like to hear other people's thoughts, other people's opinions. But if we were just to take a step back and just to really ask, is debate, is argument even an effective way at convincing someone of something? I mean, I guess that's worth debate. And I think the verdict is still out there. I'm not necessarily sure. Um, there was once a person that sought to explore whether or not people could be presented with ideas that are, you know, different from their own worldview. So what you'll find is no matter what you may think about things, and this is, I think you'll find this to be true. No matter what you think about something or how strongly, if you seek to change someone's mind or opinion, it is very difficult, if not impossible, to do that through rhetoric. If the ideas or opinions that you are seeking to change or alter are related to that individual's identity, right? How they see themselves or how they want themselves to be seen, or if it's at all related to their worldview. Now, worldview and identity, they can be said to go hand in hand. But if a thought or opinion is connected with an individual's worldview or identity, you're going to be, it's going to be very difficult to change their minds through a back and forth dialogue, right? Especially if that dialogue is in an audience. It's going to be really, really complicated. And I know the folks who are listening to this might know this to be true, right? If you are trying to convince somebody through rhetoric, debate, and it is debating or arguing something that is attached to their identity or worldview, it's going to be really, really difficult. For example, there is a lot of evidence that suggests that if an individual, this is attached to identity, if an individual believes that they are an expert or on something, right? Now, when you say you're an expert, it goes towards understanding one's identity. But if someone views themselves as being an expert, it is almost impossible to convince them of something that is different from what they already think about that thing if it is within the wheelhouse of their expertise. Whether or not they are actually an expert, it has nothing to do with it. But if they see themselves as an expert, it doesn't, you can provide evidence to the contrary, and it only further solidifies their stance in something. And there are plenty of investigations that that address this. Now, interestingly enough, if someone does not identify as being an expert or having a lot of knowledge in a particular subject, then it is easier to change their opinions on something because their identity is not wrapped up in what they are saying or believing, right? And again, identity and worldview are really connected. So the stronger that they feel or how that opinion contributes to their worldview, it makes it a little bit harder. It makes it sometimes impossible to convince someone through rhetoric. Through rhetoric. Now, it's not impossible to convince someone, and I think there's some evidence out there that I'm looking forward to exploring with you here. But through rhetoric, through debate, through argument, it's very, very difficult. Like I said, especially if what you're trying to convince is attached to somebody's identity or worldview. Um, and there has, like I said, there have been a lot of people who have looked at this. For example, there is a book that a lot of people have read. And you might have read it in college, high school, but it's a book called Plato's Republic. And it's really, really interesting. Um, the book goes into a wide variety of concepts regarding justice, and how individuals fit into a society. In there is a story that is known as the allegory of the cave. And we'll lay it out here. Say that there is a cave, and in the cave, there are prisoners who are chained up in the cave. And please go to your public library, check out Plato's Republic, or simply look up the allegory. You can find it in a wide variety of places. It's an old book for which a lot of people have read. And the allegory of the cave is one of the stories in Plato's Republic that a lot of people are familiar with. But imagine there's a cave, and in that cave, there are prisoners who are chained up in the cave. Now, these prisoners have been in that cave their entire lives, right? And they are chained up in a way that they are facing the wall of the cave. All they know is the cave. Their entire worldview is the cave. They have been chained up and they are facing a wall. Now, the cave is illuminated via a lantern, a torch, a light that is behind the prisoners who are chained up. Now, the light is shining its light, it's illuminating the room, and it creates an opportunity for things to pass, like animals, to pass in between the source of the light and the wall, but pass behind the prisoners. The prisoners are constrained in a way that doesn't allow them to turn around and observe the objects directly. The only way that they are able to perceive the world that exists, that they exist in, is through shadows that are cast onto the wall. So imagine a rat runs through the cave and runs through the cave in a way that the rat is visible to the prisoners only only by the shadow that it casts on the wall. And so the prisoners know the rat not through direct experience with the rat or through direct visualization of the rat, only through the shadows that the rat casts onto the wall as it passes by the source of light. So everything that they know is the cave. Everything that they know about the world is known through the shadows that are cast on the wall. It's all that they know. Now, and I can't remember exactly how it happens, but somehow one of the prisoners, they are released from their bondage. Somehow, I don't remember exactly how, but one of the prisoners is released. They somehow free themselves or the chains break or something, they are now free from their captivity. The remaining prisoners are still in prison, still chained up in a way where they're only facing the cave, right? So their experience hasn't changed at all, right? They're still kept in prison in the exact same manner that they have been their entire lives. Now, the prisoner who is released, they make their way through the cave, and slowly but surely they make their way out of the cave. Now, as they make their way out of the cave, the the first thing that prisoner experiences is the blinding light of the sun. So they emerge from the cave, and the light from the sun is just more than anything that they have experienced, and they are immediately blinded. They can't see. In fact, it takes a moment or two for that newly freed prisoner who has known no life outside of bondage to become accustomed to their eyes, for their eyes to adjust to the light of the sun. So it takes a moment. But once their eyes become adjusted to the sunlight, they are then able to perceive the world around them. And they're able to see grass and trees. They're able to see birds and fish and that rat that I described earlier as only able to be perceived by the prisoners only through the shadow that is cast. That newly freed prisoner is actually able to see that animal for what it is. Now that they can see it through the light, not only through mere shadows, they see these objects that they have come to only appreciate in their lifetime of bondage only through the shadows. And it's amazing. The newly freed prisoner is just all in, taking it all in. It's such a sight to behold that the newly freed prisoner eventually decides to go back into the cave to tell their fellow prisoners what they had seen. And the story goes, as the newly freed prisoner whose eyes have now grown accustomed to the light of the sun descends into the cave, they have a difficult time. They are not able to navigate the terrain of the cave and the poor lighting of the cave. It's hard to move around, bumping into walls and scraping themselves. Now that they've seen the light, they have a much more difficult time moving in darkness. However, they finally make it back to where their fellow prisoners, the other prisoners, are and remain chained and constrained to only look at that wall. Excited to tell their fellow prisoners what the truth of the world is or what they have discovered, they say, listen, this world is not real. Like rats and objects and squirrels and birds, all of which we have seen through shadows on this wall are much more than that. And I think how the story goes is the imprisoned, the still imprisoned prisoners, right? The still constrained prisoners who are facing the wall, they flatly reject the insights of the prisoner who had been released and who had gone outside and seen. They flatly reject it. The claims that the newly freed prisoner had been making about the sources of the shadows on the wall were flatly rejected. Any claims that the objects were more than those shadows were thrown out because I suppose as Plato would describe it through the characters of the story, that it is completely contradictory to their worldview. Their truth and their reality wasn't the rat, wasn't the squirrel, wasn't the bird. Their reality was the shadows. And in fact, I think how the story goes is not only do they reject this new claim, this new information that is contrary to their worldview, but they then resent the newly freed prisoner that brought them this different insight. They resent, they begin to loathe, they begin to hate the the prisoner that brings them this new insight because it's so contrary, it's contradictory to the way their world is. It is completely divorced from their worldviews. And also, please forgive me. I don't think not only do they hate, but I think they try to kill him. I think they reject um, opportunities to be freed. Um, yeah, it's just really tough. Let's see. Yeah, they just completely reject it because it's contrary to their worldviews. And I think another kind of claim is, and another thing to be extracted from this is kind of like that original. You, I'm not sure that you can tell people something and change their worldview through articulation of your experiences. I think that's one of the core lessons of the allegory of the cave. The newly freed prisoner came to their understanding through a change in their own worldview, right? Through their own lived experiences, they were able to come to a different understanding on their own. Contrary to the prisoners who were being asked to come to a different understanding and being presented with new information from another person. So, this new understanding, this new truth or appreciation, this change in worldview, I believe, as it comes from the allegory of the cave, is only made possible if an individual is able to come to that understanding on their own through their own lived experience. I think that's it. What's real to you and what's true to you are truths that you have come to on your own accord through your own lived experiences. That is what creates your worldview. And I just thought it was so interesting that the imprisoned individuals not only rejected the new information given to them, but they begin to resent and hate the person presenting them with that new information, asking them to change their worldview. I just thought that was just huge. Again, this is Plato's Republic, Allegory of the Cave. Check it out on your own. I'll try to make sure to place a link to information on that um, on this episode posting. But I just think it's absolutely fascinating. It really flies in the face of, I believe, what we might know about education, about communication, about debate, argument, and rhetoric. Um, and that in that example, and I believe that many people have found this to be true. If it is somebody's identity, if it is someone's worldview, then rhetoric, facts, or information delivered by another person with a different worldview is just not going to be sufficient for changing that worldview. I think another interesting kind of idea of that, but looked at from a different aspect, is Christopher Nolan's movie Inception. Now, it's been a while since I saw Inception, but I believe one of the ideas of Inception is that you've got these individuals who have this technology or this technique to enter into someone else's mind or someone else's dream, like someone else's I guess unconsciousness, consciousness, semi-consciousness, subconsciousness, but I guess through dreams. And they are able through this strategy to implant an idea in someone. And as the movie goes, I believe it's important to do that because it allows the person to claim that idea as their own. They are able to come to an understanding, come to a decision, come to the idea on their own because they believe that that idea is their own. I think that is a unique experience that everyone has that you'll find is that it is perhaps easier to convince or have someone have a different idea of things if they feel that they have come to it on their own. So in Inception, they go inside someone's dream, plant the idea of something, and then when they exit the dream of that individual that they are trying to convince of something, that individual wakes up with a new idea of what they want to do or what they want to carry out. And it's very important to do it that way because they need to do something or be convinced of something that is contrary to their currently held worldview or their current sense of who they are, their identity. And so, kind of the only way to do that is to embed an idea in a way that that person feels as though it is their own. And so, by feeling that it is their own, by coming to this understanding on their own, they are then able to do something perhaps different, right? More in line with the people who are implanting the idea, what they want to have happen. And that's a very important thing. And I think there is like a similarity between those two concepts, between the allegory of the cave and Inception. And I think in both situations, it's not enough to tell someone that the world is this way, or to tell someone that they are wrong and that they need to think another way. According to these two stories, these two examples, that's not the way to go about it. In Inception, for example, if the person's subconscious detects that these ideas are trying to be planted by someone else, they mount defenses against it. I mean, the person truly has to believe that the idea is their own. I just think that's just an amazing reality that I think a lot of us fail to appreciate, myself included. I mean, I like debate, I like argument, but when I debate and when I argue, very rarely, if ever, do I come out on the other end of that debate having convinced the other person where they say, you know what I believed prior to this debate and what I have taken a great deal of energy trying to convince you of, I now disagree with that and I now agree with what you said. Very rarely does that happen. And I believe that And many of your experiences, you've not seen that happen either. And if we are to perhaps take anything from, I guess, the allegory of the cave or, you know, Inception, it is that if we are to work to change minds, if we are to work to convince people of a thing, regardless of what that thing is, what that idea is, if it is contrary to that individual's worldview or that individual's identity, then it is not going to be enough to out debate them, out talk them, or present them with facts. In fact, as I stated at the beginning, that the presentation of those facts will only further entrench that individual in their held beliefs. And you should not be surprised if they get defensive. You should not be surprised if they work to defend their worldview. You should not be surprised if they work to defend their identity in the face of someone asking them to change. Whether you agree with me or not, because I'm simply just presenting you with information, you'll have to come to this understanding or appreciation yourself. Maybe you've just stumbled across this podcast. I don't know. You have to come to that understanding yourself. We have to work hard to provide experiences that allow people to, on their own terms and in their own time and in their own way, come to a different understanding. And I'm not saying that that's easy. I'm not saying that at all. In many cases, it's very difficult. In the allegory of the cave, it took an individual being released from their shackles in a way that I couldn't even remember how they were released to even come to their understanding of things. So it's quite difficult. And I think even in that story, that individual offered to release that person or their fellow prisoners from their chains. And I believe how the story went is they refused. Let me check. Did the prisoner offer to release fellow prisoners from bondage? Let's see. Because that's interesting because that's an attempt to change the experiences, right? To give people a different experience of something. And I believe in the story, if I'm not mistaken, They they refuse. Let's see. So I don't know if the person does this. So Plato suggests that if he tried to release them or drag them out, the other prisoners, they might kill him for disturbing their reality. So it was just the randomness of events that allowed that one prisoner to even to see the light, right? He couldn't then go back and free the other prisoners because they would refuse. They would not allow that. There would be an intense defense of their held worldview. So, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's just difficult. In fact, when the prisoner went back, not only did they reject and they resent, but they mocked him, saying that the journey of the released prisoner ruined his vision. So it's just really difficult. It's the reality of saying something contrary to somebody's held worldviews. So all in all, what I am suggesting is what so many more brilliant minds than my own have already suggested in ways that are better articulated than what I am attempting to do. But you have to create ways that people can, under their own power, on their own time, on their own terms, come to their own understanding of the way the world is. And that might not work on your timeline, but do not, as I stated, be surprised that if you thrust a new understanding of way of thinking onto an individual that doesn't hold your worldview, do not be surprised if they defend their worldview. So, this has been another episode of the Richard Watkins Podcast. And debate is great, debate is a fun exercise. It is worth participating in, but do not overestimate the power of rhetoric. Do not overestimate the power of debate in changing people's minds. I think what changes people's minds are a change in people's circumstances. I believe that's perhaps what changes people's minds, at least if you are to go off of the movie Inception or Plato's Republic. Again, this has been Richard Watkins, and this has been another episode of the Richard Watkins Podcast. The Richard Watkins Podcast is a proud production of the Science Policy Action Network. Check them out on span-inc.org. Take care of yourself and remember that the future is not something to wait for. It is something to build. Until next time, take care.